Forks on the Road by Cary, Jensen. Chapter 1. The Quest. Rick and I were in a gastronomic rut, lunch-wise. To say that it was gastronomic paralysis would probably be more accurate, but somehow rut, with its grimy connotation and the allusion to a well-traveled road, seems more appropriate. We had settled down to visiting the same 3 or 4 places for lunch, and it was getting stale. Who are we? Right. Let's get that one out of the way toot sweet. I am a software consultant, developer, and author, and Rick is a database administrator. I'm the classic example of a road warrior. I travel, mostly by plane, to meet my clients all over North America and Europe. I also speak at a lot of software conferences. As a result, I spend almost as much time in hotels as in my own home. Lately, I've been spending a lot of time in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Grand Forks and its sister city of East Grand Forks, Minnesota, lie at the confluence of the Red River of the North and the Red Lake River, nestled in the heart of the Red River Valley. Despite sporting only a modest population of about 60,000 people, Grand Forks is the 3rd largest city in North Dakota. The greater Grand Forks area, which is locally referred to as the Grand Cities area, has a total population that approaches about 100,000, though this number includes the many small farming communities nearby, as well as the Grand Forks Air Force Base, located 10 miles to the west. The economy is heavily based on agriculture, with sugar beets being one of its most notable products. If you fly over North Dakota on a cold, clear winter's day, you will see towering white plumes of steam rising from the landscape at intervals. These emanate from the sugar plants boiling down the sugar beets that were harvested earlier in the fall. But there's business, finance, and technology as well. Grand Forks is home to the University of North Dakota, the oldest institution of higher learning in the state, and notable for its research in medicine, energy, and aerospace sciences. The largest employer in the area is All True Health Systems, and Alaris Financial as well as Amazon have a significant presence. Though the Grand Cities area lacks the natural beauty of, say, Santa Fe, New Mexico, its people make up for this. I have a genuine fondness for the earnest and wholesome people who inhabit this region on what remains of the great northern plains of the American Midwest. And since I've already strayed off the topic, I might as well mention that my editor, Loy, who also happens to be my wife, and whom I affectionately refer to as the Loy, simply hated the last sentence of the preceding paragraph. You see, she is from the upper Midwest and is somehow offended by the phrase earnest and wholesome. Yeah, I know. I didn't even need to Google it. These are terms of endearment, right? Maybe she thought I meant homely instead of wholesome. It's anybody's guess. My affection for the people of the Grand Cities area led me to refer them as Forkers. I'm not sure that the residents of the Grand Cities area actually call themselves Forkers, but if they don't, they should consider doing so. Where else can you stand up and proudly say, I'm a Forker? But I've digressed, though I admit that this will not be the last time I do it. When I speak, I digress often, adding off-topic comments and background information to give form and reason to the greater conversation. At least that's my intention, and I nearly always return to the original point. Which brings me back to Rick. When I first began to work in Grand Forks, Rick was a relative newcomer. 2 years prior, he was lured from an IT job in the Los Angeles area to Grand Forks to manage the databases of an enterprise-level software system that was under development. My going out to lunch with Rick was not part of my earliest experiences in Grand Forks. In those days, our development team consisted of 6 members, and on most days, lunch was brought in to feed the team. If I were a cynical person, I might have thought that this was done in order to keep us at our desks in an attempt to squeeze every possible minute of work out of each of us. But I don't think that was the case. Bringing in food at lunchtime was the brainchild of our fearless leader, Lars. In those days, Lars was intimately involved in the software development side of things, and we all spent significant time together planning the design and implementation of the software systems we were working on. Having lunch in the office offered us all a good opportunity to keep the conversation going without distraction. But the conversations did not always stick to technology. Both Rick and Lars are really smart guys, and when our conversations strayed to other topics, those discussions were animated, full of verbal jousting, irony, and arcane references, and often punctuated with laughter. Over time, these team lunches became less frequent, and eventually they stopped altogether. This happened as Rick and I took greater control of the software development, and Lars moved on to an area in which he excels above all others, management. Having come to appreciate the erudite banter that accompanied my conversations with Rick, I suggested to him that we go out for lunch together, offering us both a change of scenery as well as a break from the technical details of our work. At first, Rick declined my invitations. He made it clear that he wasn't a particularly social person and preferred his own company in his non-working hours. He even expressed his explicit discomfort with quid pro quo, specifically the give and take of social interaction. But I kept at it, and eventually Rick gave in. We started lunching together on a regular basis, and I must say that I enjoyed his company immensely. I looked forward to our lunchtime visits and the conversations that accompanied them. Topics we discussed ranged from politics to movies, from science to literature, from work-related details to current affairs. Regardless of the topic, there was always an element of intellectual gamesmanship. The change in Rick was subtle, but there was change. Bit by bit, he became increasingly more social. Maybe his move from the hustle of Southern California to the slower lifestyle of Grand Forks was having an effect on him. But I also felt that I was in part responsible for some of this change, gradually bringing him out of his self-imposed shell. It's hard to tell. Nonetheless, over time we became good friends, and I must admit that for a time there he was my closest friend. It was about this time when we realized that we had become too predictable. We were eating lunch together frequently, but it was almost always at one of just a couple of places. While the conversation was stimulating, the routine became just that, routine. We had worked ourselves into this gastronomical rut that I referred to at the outset of this chapter. It was Rick who first expressed his discomfort with our predicament. Maybe, he suggested, we should try to visit some new places when you return on your next trip. And, he continued, we could write about it. But there was more to his suggestion than just writing. What he was talking about was reflecting. Both of us, being outsiders, didn't quite fit in with the grand city's mindset. In addition to expanding our gastronomical horizons, we hoped to better understand the culinary psyche of these durable residents of America's high plains. Rick's suggestion not only offered a way out of our malaise, it gave us purpose, a noble goal, and we eventually gave it a name. Our lunchtime excursions would become quests. There was one part of Rick's suggestion that didn't quite sit entirely right with me, however. While I love to write, Rick wanted us to write together. After a quest, you could write something about it, he offered, and then I will add my 2 cents. You could then reply to me and we could go back and forth. We could treat it like a thread on social media. It was an interesting idea, but I was having none of it. I couldn't see how that would work out, and I said as much. If we were going to capture the essence of what a day out in the Grand Cities area has to offer, it needed to be one voice, one point of view. I was the writer, and I wanted to do it. I admit without reservation that this was selfish. Had always wanted to develop my writing skills in a non-technical area, and my experience has taught me that if you want to get better at writing, you do it by writing. I didn't want to have to share. So, who's being antisocial now? I'm not sure how much writing Rick has done, but making me the scribe for our adventures seemed to suit him. At least that's what I thought. Inspired by Rick's suggestion, upon arriving at work the following morning, I announced that today was New Place Wednesdays, and we were obligated to eat somewhere new for lunch. Rick immediately saw the wisdom of this edict and offered the first rule of the quest. We realized, once underway, that you can't have a quest without some clear guidelines. So, rule number 1, the place can't be one that either of us had already patronized. 2 more rules followed. The second rule was that the lunch destination had to be a local spot, not one of those national chains. Rule 3, the restaurant must have seating. These rules seemed so reasonable that we adopted them without further consideration. When lunchtime came, we took the first steps on what became an epic journey. Yeah, right, that's a bit over the top, but we're talking about a quest here. Our experience that day, described in the following chapter, was a success. The next morning, when I arrived at work, Rick was quick to opine that New Place Wednesdays was a wrong-minded name for what we were doing. For one thing, it limited us to exploring the gastronomical landscape of Grand Forks and its people only on Wednesdays, and that sort of defeats the goal, doesn't it? Think about it. A month of Wednesdays. My goodness, even the phrase, a month of Wednesdays, feels wrong. Rick was right. That day, a Thursday, mind you, we visited another restaurant new to us. That, too, was a positive experience. By that afternoon, our calling had taken form. It was real, and it had a name. The Quest. I can't remember whether I came up with the name or Rick did. It was probably Rick. But it doesn't really matter. We were questers, and the quest was more important than the petty honor of being the clever one. But not all lunches were quests, far from it. We typically planned our quests in advance, either prior to leaving the office or by way of discussion on the way to the restaurant. In some cases, though, a regular lunch might fall into place just right, and we both knew that a spontaneous quest was underway. But there was always a clear distinction. It was either lunch or it was a quest, and every one of the stories that follow are quests. So, join me now as we step back in time. It's the year 2008, and we're in Grand Forks, North Dakota.